Hey, welcome back to the channel. Got everything on the bench here for you. So we're going to do a quick tips video of how to flow solder. We're going to capture that point in time. I'm going to zoom in really tight on the joint to make sure that you can see exactly that point in time when the solder flows. And that way you get a good, nice, solid bond on your pad and the wire that's attached to it. So that's what this video is about, so stay tuned. All right, so the first thing is we have solder. Okay, so we just want to make sure we have some decent solder. This is the solder that I use, and it's a Kaiser, and I don't know, this is a 1 pound roll, which you probably would never need that much, but it's a 0.031 inch, 0.8 millimeter. So that's the size of solder that I use for pretty much anything in what I'm doing in the hobby with the FPV building quads. All right, the next thing that I have is rosin paste. So this rosin paste is what I use on the flight controller or on my electronics. This is to prepare the surface to be soldered to. This is going to protect your solder to keep it from oxidizing, and then also it will keep it from cold jointing. So you can actually solder your pad and your wire, and then there's a layer in between that you can't really see, and this will break off. The rosin paste will help with the heat transfer to make sure they bond and flow together properly. If you cold joint it, and I tell you, it aggravates me when I get parts from manufacturers and the wire just pops right off. So we want to make sure that doesn't happen, and rosin paste will be a good catalyst between what you're trying to solder and your solder. I use this to clean. I don't like using a sponge because the solder wants to roll around on the tip. It's aggravating. So I use a brass Brillo pad, and then I use tip dip. Tip dip will keep my tip of my soldering iron at a premium. This is something that you can get at the local Home Depot. So the tip dip is something that I will dip the tip of my iron in it before I go in to solder something. So I'll just kind of hit a little bit of tip dip. I'll clean it in the Brillo pad, and then I'll apply just a touch of solder to it and then go at it. So what I'd like to do now that I've explained all these things, I like to run my soldering iron at about 225 degrees Celsius. If you're soldering something larger, you want to use a larger tip. So that's the main thing, okay? You want to have maybe an assortment of tips. Let me grab some of these other ones. So like this one here, we have like a wedge. Okay, you can see that there's a little bit of a wedge. So if the soldering pad that you're going after is the same size as the wedge, that's kind of what you want to use. A lot of people have issues with XT60s. XT60s take a larger wire to the ESC. You want to use a knife for that. So basically what I'm trying to say is I have two different kind of wedges. I have a large wedge and then a smaller wedge, and then I have a pinched wedge. I don't know if you can see that or not. And then these really teeny ones, I don't really use these that much for solder pads. I usually use this for punching holes or something like that. This is the tip that I normally will use. And then I just buy a larger bag of them, so I have, plenty of them. This is a pretty cheap soldering iron that I've gotten off Amazon. I think it was like, I don't know, $18 or something. So you can tighten this up and put all the different tips in there. So it's nice to be able to change your tips. And then I have a little adapter plate for Maytech. We'll just go ahead and solder up these. For the example, I'm just going to use a copper tube. This should represent a pretty gnarly thing to solder to. So it's going to wick your heat away It'll be pretty close to soldering a larger wire on there, but giving it a large enough space for me to film so that you can see exactly when it flows. So I'll go ahead and grab my helping hands here. I'll get everything set up. I'll zoom in nice and tight so you can see exactly that point in time when the solder flows. Alright, so we'll go ahead and grab our rosin paste here, and we'll just apply some of that to our piece. Alright, so we have our knife all ready to go. So the first thing we're going to do is just go ahead and heat up this area. Want to just get it warm enough to it'll accept the solder a little bit. So we'll go ahead and put our solder on. So you put your wire on your project and then apply your heat, and then watch that solder. There it goes. See the solder flowing across there? That's what you want to see. That means that solder has flowed to all the edges of your pad. Now, if you want to, you can add a little bit of solder to it as well, so you can get that nice shiny shimmer look, or whatever the case may be. But you don't want to add so much solder to it that it's a gigantic mess, and then you can flow that solder into the other one, whatever the case may be. But do you see when that solder flows so it becomes liquid? Okay? A cold joint is when you flow the solder of the wire, but you don't flow the solder on the pad. Now, see that? See how it crawls across there and it all becomes liquid? That's what we mean by flowing the solder. All right, so now I have, let's say these pads here. We'll go ahead and solder those up. So what I'm going to need to do is change my soldering tip. So I'll go ahead and get this, and I'll zoom in real tight on that for you. So we'll go ahead and pre-tin all these pads, and then also we'll go ahead and solder our wire to each one of them. So I have a little wire here that we can use. So let me go ahead and change out from the knife tip to our standard triangular tip. Alright, so the first thing we want to do is go ahead and pre-tin these pads, but keep in mind that this adapter plate is probably 2 years old. So these pads need something other than just soldering directly to them. So I will use some of my rosin paste to be our catalyst. So go ahead and paste up our pads. And then we'll go ahead and get our iron nice and hot. So we're about 200 and, just to make it easy, we'll go 225 Celsius. And then we'll go ahead and get our solder. Now, if you want, you can solder an individual pad. So you go ahead and apply a little heat to the pad and then drop in your solder. So that's about all you need. Okay. Now, if you want to, you can put a larger amount of solder on your pad, and then you can warm these up. So we'll go ahead and pre-tin all of these. Okay. Or you can do individual ones. You can just put a little solder on each one if you want. All right. So our pads are all pre-tinned up. So we'll put our wire right here. And now we'll just touch the top of our wire and we'll cinch that in. Okay? So just as that solder were to flow just a little bit, right there. See that? That's a good bond. Now, if your solder's dry, so let me overheat this pad. I have quite a bit of rosin paste on there, so it's probably not going to do it. Let me grab a different pad. So we're going to just go dry to the pad. Grab some more solder here. See this? See this triangle coming off of there? See how it's wanting to stick? And then your soldering looks like garbage? Is because it's dry. You can see that. Let me go back. You're too hot and you're too dry. It's ruining the solder. See how that doesn't want to stick either. So if your solder's dry, it's too hot, then it's just going to look like garbage. It's not going to bond very well either. See how that just came right off? I mean, that just popped right off of that pad. It's not attaching to that pad very well. Okay? So that's why you need to keep your solder wet with rosin. You don't want so much rosin paste that you're dripping and all that stuff all over the place. But you want to make sure that it's wet enough that it's catalyst together. Okay? So let me pull this back off. Now let's go ahead and put some rosin paste on there so that I can kind of show you what I mean. You want to have a catalyst between your solder and your solder pad, especially if the solder pads are oxidized. Now, I'm going to make a little adjustment to our wire length. Do you see the length of that wire coming out of the end of there? That's what it should be. Your exposed wire should not be any longer than your pad. So I'm going to go ahead and clean my tip off, and then I'm going to go ahead and grab a little bit of solder. So we'll put that up here. So that's the solder pad that I want. I'm going to grab a little bit of solder, and I'm just going to touch that on there, and then that's it. Watch that solder ball flow. See how did you see that? Right when it became liquid? You can feel that. When you put that on there, you can feel when that happens. And you want to just hold it in place long enough to where it can, that's bonded. You'll rip the pad off before that wire will pop off of there. Okay? Let's do another one. So we'll go ahead and put our wire over our pad. We'll grab our solder. We're just going to go ahead and touch in there. And I can feel right when that went, all flowed together. Do you see that? Let's do another one. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and clean my tip. Y'all make sure your tip is nice and clean. So we'll go ahead and grab some solder. Right there. I could feel right when the wires wanted to lay down nice on that pad. Okay? See that? That would be if I just barely touch that. That's a good joint right there. That's the joint I would want on my flight controller. That wire ain't coming off of there. You'll rip the pad off. Let me see if I can focus a little more. I'm gonna unflow this pad. I just want you to see that point in time when that thing is just right there. Let's do it again. Practice makes perfect, right? Right there, you see, I wasn't done. See, it's still attached. Did you see how it flow? The solder was flowing up to that point right there. Okay. Now, you want to clean that off with alcohol. I got 91% alcohol to clean the pads off. Now see how this is starting to stick? That ain't no good. You don't want that, because these little triangles end up touching other places that you don't want. So if you just put a little bit of flux to it, right there. See how that's a cold joint? See how that's not soldered properly? That'll break off in a crash or something. And then you'll be like, why is my VTX not working? Because you cold jointed it. It was only attached very small spot. We need to make sure that that solder flows all the way over the whole piece. So to do that, we need to clean our tip, make sure it's nice and clean, and then we need to put a little bit of rosin paste on that. But we've already messed with this joint so much now that it's not a good quality joint anymore. So we need to clean that. So I take a little bit of alcohol. I do have a scrubby brush that I use. In this case, I'm just going to simply use 91% alcohol on a paper towel. Work out all right. So the burnt rosin paste and all the yucky stuff, we'll just get that off of there. Okay, so we're nice and clean. We'll go ahead and grab some more of our rosin paste. Don't want too much on there. You'll never be able to solder to it. Grab our soldering iron. Just go ahead and clean our tip up a little bit. So that's what the tip looks like, nice and clean. And then we'll get our solder up here where we need it. I do that a lot, where I'll just kind of wrap the solder. I'll just have it hanging there. Just hanging out of the way where I can get it. We'll get our wire put in place. You gotta see how I'm filming this. This is ridiculous, but grab a little bit of solder. Right there, I could feel it. It just dropped in. Back it up a little bit. All right, now that's a good joint. That's what you want to see. You want to see that flowed nicely on there. You know what I mean? Because if that joint is dry, it's not going to adhere to the pad. It'll be like this one here. See how this one was, that one's all crusty and gnarly. So you'll want to fix that pad, and you can easily do that by just having a little bit of rosin paste on there. Clean your tip, and then just hit it with a little bit of solder, and now it's a nice, clean, ready to go pad. This one here's got plenty of solder. We'll just reapply heat to it. Okay, so that's kind of, I don't know, the best way I can explain to you. Let me go ahead and zoom out. That's kind of the best way I can explain to you how to solder your wire, making sure that your solder is flowing correctly. For cleaning my tip, like I said, I just have these two pieces here. I just stick that in there and then scrub it off, and that tip is ready to go. I'll shut my iron off, so I'll let this cool down, and then once my iron is cool, obviously it's hot as can be right now, and I'll set it aside. But yeah, the tip dip in this is kind of how I like to do things. Once my tip is cooled off, I'll put a little bit of that tip dip on it just to keep it from oxidizing. But that's a good solid joint there, and there's a good solid joint on that piece of copper. Now obviously that copper pipe is like overkill, so hopefully that helps you out. I thought it would just be interesting to do a quick tips video of when the solder flows, like right when you see that point. So I've kind of edited this to cut out a lot of the talking, but I just wanted you to see, when does that solder flow and what does it look like? If you've never done any welding, then it doesn't really make sense to you to describe it. You kind of got to see when that tin just kind of flows across there, and then once that all becomes a liquid, it will flow to the corners of your pad, because that's pretty important. But to get that joint and to make sure that your wire's not crazy long where it's sticking way out, and you only want to expose enough wire to cover the pad. I hope this helped you out, and if it did, or if it entertained you, give me a thumbs up and subscribe. If you hated it, maybe give it a thumbs down. It all works. Enjoy the breeze.